Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk, and we got a busy show coming up. A little bit later in the show, there was a letter to the editor from a gentleman, North Dakota expatriate, who's now living overseas, but he wrote a letter to the Fargo Forum, said, I served in the Marine unit deployed in Los Angeles. Here's what I think of Trump's orders. We're going to talk with him about that later in the show. But before we get there, we saw what may or may not be a resolution to a controversy. I don't know what you want to call it. Controversy feels like a strong word, but an error made in the governor's office over a veto, which resulted in our guest, now Attorney General Drew Wrigley, issuing an opinion about whether that veto stands or doesn't stand or how it works. He issued an opinion essentially deciding that, and I should set up the issue because it is a little confusing. When the governor issues a veto, this governor, Kelly Armstrong, sent two documents to the legislature. One was his veto message, which is required by the Constitution, essentially lining out in detail what he was vetoing and why. And then the other, which he sent, was a marked up document. And the marked up document is the problem. The veto message was correct and correctly described what the governor was intending to do. The marked up document accidentally crossed out too much language from the bill and ended up axing, in addition to the line item veto of, I think it was like $150,000 grant, also eliminated like $35 million in housing funding, which the governor did not intend to veto. Legislative Council, a few days before the Attorney General issued their opinion, essentially saying that a special session was obligatory at this point. The Attorney General disagreeing. And by my read of the law, and granted, I'm not a lawyer, I'm just somebody who can read. It
So can Senator Hogue, evidently.
Well, yeah, we'll get into what Senator Hogue had to say as well. But I guess I feel like your opinion was right. When I read Article 5 of the Constitution, it really only requires the governor to send one thing to the legislature. It says he has to return the bill. So it doesn't say he has to mark it up or anything, but then it also says he has to send a veto message, and that's it. And so if the veto message was accurate, it doesn't seem to matter. The bill, Governor Armstrong's office has described the bill, the version, the marked up version of the bill they sent as a visual aid. And by my reading of the Constitution, that seems okay. Yeah.
I think you set it up perfectly. This interview can be over. I think that you, I don't know if that does. I mean, I think that sets it out. And there was a, as I mentioned the other day, there was a bit of a tempest that was launched. I mean, there was a lot of headlines around that the governor made a big mistake, and it even made national news because that sounds, there are only 50 governors, so they made this big mistake in the veto. But what I really honed in on in our media conference the other day, which we had because there's so much media interest in this, I didn't want to spend 5 hours talking with all separate reporters. That worked out well to have a unified discussion on it. The governor's veto message, which is, as you say, there are two things constitutionally required for a governor's veto to take place. You got to return the bill. I'll talk about that in a second, why there's that requirement. Return the bill that's being vetoed and explain what your veto is. Governor Armstrong, I mentioned in the press conference the other day, he's a lawyer and he's a good one. And his message was clear. It was clear what was being taken out. Even some people who disagreed with the ultimate conclusion of my attorney general opinion agreed that that message was very clear in what would be extracted from the bill as a result of the governor's line item veto. So that wasn't in question. His message was 2 pages long, detailed what was being taken out. And then you have to return the bill. Well, there's been a common practice that has come along, not constitutionally mandated, that governors have scored out the words that they're taking out with their veto, but it has to be described. This is a case of first impression in North Dakota. It has never it's never come up before. It hasn't been litigated before the Supreme Court, and there are no attorney general opinions on point. And I said the other day, and I say again today, it's because it's so clear. There's one person with the power to veto legislation in North Dakota, and that is the governor. And what he and someday she has to do is transmit their thinking on that. Here's what I am vetoing. He did that, and they have to send you the bill. And the bill, if you want to mark it up, you can. And if you do, as was done here, it's not the veto message. It doesn't, this isn't a hieroglyphics contest. It is a language contest.
So, Drew, you said that this is so clear.
Yeah.
That's why there's not been a court case. That's why there's not been an attorney general's opinion. Ledge Counsel came out 2 days before. I think the timing of this is all very interesting. Came out 2 days before and basically said, hey, you got to come back. Then you come out 2 days later and say, nope. Ledge Counsel's wrong, and it's my job as the attorney general to offer an attorney general's opinion. And then it seemed to flare up a little bit. You made a comment about, this is a political exercise from Ledge Counsel. Senator Hogue said you were wrong because he has the ability to read English words or something along those lines. This seems like a small mistake that is blown up into some.
Yeah, let's read the quote. What he told a reporter, Peyton Hogue, is that he would love to go along with Wrigley's opinion, but his, quote, understanding of the English language and, quote, respect for the rule of law prevents him from doing so.
So Senator Hogue doesn't agree it's as clear as you think so, Attorney General. Like, why has this become such a big thing? Are people bored?
Yeah, it could be that. Senator Hogue's a good friend of mine, and we had a conversation that afternoon. In fact, I had seen the quote that you just mentioned. And when he called me later in the afternoon, I asked him if he was calling to discuss the English language, at which point he started speaking Spanish, and we started off with a pretty good laugh. But we had a really good conversation for 45 minutes. He doesn't see it the same way, and I respect him, and I respect his thinking on the matter. But we delved into the perspective that I brought, which was as a result of legal research. Not just, we have no cases on point in North Dakota. But around the country, and it's been handled a little bit in a couple of other states, and they reached the same exact conclusion that this office did and that I did with the Attorney General opinion. I agree with them that the English language is what matters, and I'll just, for your listeners, what the Constitution specifically mandates is the governor shall return for consideration any vetoed item or bill, comma, with a written statement of the governor's objections. The objections are what are the veto, and you have to return the vetoed bill. It doesn't say any vetoed bill with scored out language for what's taken out. That would be a different situation, right? But it doesn't say that, and it could. You can't infer what is not included in the Constitution in this situation. That was our main point. And people say, well, then why do they require the return of the bill? Think back to when the Constitution was.
I was just going to say, was that like an anachronism from when we had like one copy of the bill and we 100%. Weren't digitally?
Yeah. Back when they cut and paste things and they're amending things on the fly and things are going around. But at the end of the day, the legislature acts on it. Here's the physical legislation is acted upon. It is sent then down to the governor for signature or veto. Then the governor, in this instance, vetoes it. And then you make sure, like, hey, listen, this is document draft control. This is the one. This is what I am vetoing. And by the way, here's my constitutionally mandated detailed message. And both those things happened here, and that's why the veto was effective. I want to address the legislative council issue and say what I said in the press conference, which doesn't get reported, and I mean it. I know the folks up there. I've known John Bjornson a long time. I know and like the people up there, which is beside the next point I want to make is they've got good lawyers up there, but they have a different responsibility from what we have. They have no responsibility. They have no authority to issue opinions such that people could cite to that as legal authority in the state of North Dakota. That's just not, they don't have any legal standing for that. That's not a bad thing. It's just that's their job. They are the lawyers to advise the legislature. Full stop. They have no advisory capacity for the executive branch whatsoever. That's why I said, I don't know why people think think politics is a dirty word. When I said that the other day, I could just as well have said it's a persuasive piece. They're trying to persuade. I don't know how else to take. I started reading their memo, and the first thing they talk about is the cover letter with 2 sentences in it that the governor affixed to the veto package, which is the veto package is the bill itself and his detailed message about what's being vetoed. Well, he also put a cover sheet on there as a courtesy, I guess. It has no consequence. It means nothing in this. And that's where Legislative Council started out. I think it was very clearly crafted as it is a political document in that it is trying to address to the legislative branch, here's why we, your lawyers here in Legislative Council, think that this should be challenged and go forward. There's nothing wrong with that. I've seen John Bjornsson since then, and we're around here. Again, this is a man I like and respect, and I wasn't showing any disrespect by saying that. Politics is not a dirty word. Politics is what happens in the political process.
Yeah.
This was not born of legal research and citing cases directly on point, because there are none. And the cases that they cited, we really firmly believe were for different propositions. That's all.
To your point about Article 5 and requiring the return of the bill, I actually remember reading, and I don't think it was in North Dakota. I think it was like in Nebraska or something. But back in the early days, they actually had a political tactic where somebody would steal like the only copy of the bill out of the legislative chamber before, so if they couldn't find the bill, they couldn't recreate it, because back then they didn't have like copy machines and stuff. So I always thought that was kind of and that's immediately what I thought of when it said return the bill. I was like, well, that's because they had the one copy of it, right?
You have it right. You have it right. That's exactly right. It's not as intriguing when you really get into this. It's not as intriguing as it looks when you've got the headline saying, governor made a big mistake. That is to be assessed by the governor's statement. And that's why I point out Governor Armstrong is a lawyer, and he's a good one. And his language in his veto message detailing his veto, it's very clear. And there's not controversy around that. No, we'll see what happens. I know that a lot of legislators are reading through the opinion that I issued the other day. Took a lot of time to make that as concise as I could make it, because I want people to be able to get through it. And as that's happening, the legislature is going to make an assessment whether they want to challenge my attorney general opinion in court, which is their right. That's their constitutional role. They can do that. We'll see whether they do. They sure can. But I have half a hunch that when they read through it, they'll realize it's a clearer issue than maybe they thought, and there won't be a stomach to challenge it in court, because they'll recognize, hey, we've got clear guidance on this. It comports with the Constitution. And back to Senator Hogue, I've known Senator Hogue for a long time. We've had plenty of differences over time. He's a really good man and a good public servant. And when we have differences, that's all there is. He's well known for he is very firm in his resolve on his perspective on things. I think that I may be guilty of that same thing. I'll say guilty. I think we should be happy about that. But we always have a good-natured exchange, and I appreciated him giving me a call the other day. Actually, we had a good time.
You're taking a sort of a step back. I mean, this is very much an inside the Capitol game, right? I mean, it's the legislative branch sort of protecting their turf, executive protecting their turf. But ultimately, we're talking about $150,000 from a bill that was going to a private nonprofit to pay for an FTE. I don't believe the legislature, even if they come back, are going to override that $150,000. But what are the options? You said the legislature could now sue. And again, from a taxpayer point of view, so now the taxpayers are paying for both sides of this lawsuit over $150,000 veto. That doesn't make any sense to me. But like, why should I don't want to say this matters like in the big picture of the branches of government, but as a taxpayer, why should people care about this $150,000 veto? Doesn't this just look like a bunch of boys fighting at the Capitol right now?
I think to a lot of people it does exactly what you just described. And actually, what you mentioned about the economics of these decisions, I think lends itself to what I said a moment ago, the idea that it's unlikely to be challenged.
Yeah.
Probably for those reasons too. But I also think as they read through the opinion, they realize, okay, now this is what synthesized down, this is what the Constitution says. It all sort of comports and makes sense. I think you had a really important point though too. That has to be considered, and I shouldn't say has to. The legislature can consider those economics of it. We'll see. I'll be interested in the conversations with individual legislators in the days ahead. I think Senator Hogue said that he and maybe Leader LaFour maybe are going to meet with the governor or want to have a meeting with the governor at some point. We'll see how that plays out. But they're important matters, and this precedent will go forward and guide governors in their issuing of vetoes up ahead. And I wonder what a governor doesn't have to affix anything to the bill itself; doesn't have to put any red marks on it, and we'll see if maybe that whatever. We'll see what happens. But I think this was a clear decision, and I rewrote it. As I say, as succinctly and directly as we could, and hopefully that prevails upon people to recognize nothing to see here. This was a properly exercised veto, and it's not for me to say whether it's a smart or unwise veto. That's his. I made that point the other day too. He's the one person on the planet with the authority to veto. Legislature can overrule and everything else, but we shouldn't make it a game to try to figure out how to undercut the veto in some other way other than just the constitutional override. So
we do have, and it's not court precedent. And I should say also, the reason why we're talking about, I think everyone on this call cares about it because we're all political nerds. And I think the people who are listening to the Plain Talk podcast probably care because they're also,
Sure.
I don't know that the general public cares all that much. And I think there's two considerations too. There's the question of law. Obviously, Legislative Council has their point of view. And even if the legislators accept that that's the correct legal interpretation, then there's the additional thing we'll do. Are we going to spend taxpayer money litigating this? And then at the end of this, then probably be forced into depending on how the court would rule, potentially be forced into a special session, which would be more cost to the taxpayers over what? This $150,000 grant, which had none of this happened, they never would have come back to try to veto anyway. It seems like a poor way to spend taxpayer dollars. I am interested, though, the courts, and actually you were kind of involved in this. A former gubernatorial candidate, Paul Sorum, sued, I think this was in 2013 when the lawsuit happened, sued for the results of the 2012 election. And if I'm remembering right, he was upset that there was some clerical issue with the forms for the candidacy forms in the Secretary of State's office. The forms didn't explicitly comply with the statute. And so they were asking the court to throw out not just all the results for the Republican ticket, which was the Jack Dalrymple, Drew Wrigley ticket, or the Democratic ticket, which I think was Marvin Nelson that year?
Oh, no, Ryan Taylor. Ryan Taylor and Ellen Chaffee.
Okay, yeah, that's right. Ryan Taylor, yeah. Throw out all the votes for the Republican ticket, all the votes for the Democratic ticket, and award Paul Sorum and I think Michael Coachman,
right,
who received, I think, 1.2% of the vote, award them the governorship. Now, the courts did not go along with that. And the courts, I think, even concluded that the form wasn't good, but then also said this was such a small matter that didn't really have, and I was kind of thinking about that in the context of this. Like, there was nothing nefarious going on here. Kelly was explicit. He was very clear about his intention. So what are we even arguing about? I don't know. That kind of gave me an insight on how the court might look at this.
That's a really good reference point, and I hadn't thought about that. That's a good reference point, though, because so for your listeners, what it was that I think the mandate was that two different components of your form be on the same page, like they one page or the other side or whatever, and both the Democrat and Republican tickets had them. It was 2 pages stapled together instead of it all being on one form. That's what it was, and the court said that's ridiculous. All the appropriate information is there. Public was perfectly aware of what was going on. We're not going to, because somebody used a stapler versus one piece of paper with all the information on there. And it, like I say, both the Democrat and Republican ticket did the same thing as it had become the practice. And nothing, it wasn't a constitutional matter. It was a technicality, and all the information was intact. So I think that's actually a good analogy, except that in this one, even more to the point, the Constitution gave a mandate, and Governor Armstrong satisfied that mandate. One other thing I wanted to address, there was an issue raised by there was a question. Somebody said, well, the Attorney General and the Governor, they were citing for the Burgum case, saying the Attorney General and the Governor can't get together after the fact and conclude what the thing meant. And I'll give you some behind the scenes baseball on this whole matter. Nothing like that happened. The public should be assured that the Governor of North Dakota didn't expend 1 minute trying to strong arm, persuade, cajole the Attorney General. Not 1 minute. He never did. all the way through the process. Governor Armstrong didn't call me and try to persuade me, or here, Drew, here's what my thinking is on this. Zero. And I personally really appreciate that. And I mentioned, not because I can't be persuaded, but we have different roles in this. I just think that's good. That's good public character on his part to just say, like, look, there's a role and we'll see what the AG says about it.
If I remember the Burgum case, that was more regarding like what did the language mean? Like there was some ambiguity there. I think everyone agrees Kelly's veto message was unambiguous. The problem was it conflicted with the visual aid that he sent along with it that had the wrong cross out. So
different legal situation. And I'm not implying that our predecessors did anything wrong. It's just there was a question of, could they then later on say, oh, no harm, no foul, that wasn't a constitutional veto, so that changes it somehow? No, you can't. The veto is what it is, and that's what happened in this case. It is what Governor Armstrong said. But I do want people to know that, because I can't remember what the reporting was that I saw. There was some sense that, well, the governor has this argument, and then he kind of persuaded the AG. I just can't stress to people enough, that is not, our governor was not strong-arming anybody or cajoling anybody. I first learned of this sitting in the Industrial Commission, and he made his comments there about it. I hadn't even seen the veto yet at that moment. He didn't say, this was all in an open meeting. He brought it up that this had happened and it was going to get righted, whatever it took. And that's all kind of what he said. I walked upstairs after Industrial Commission and I asked my staff, I said, can I see the vetoes? And I looked at them and I read through them, and then I read through the constitutional provision, and I'm like, well, we'll see. I mean, I'm not so sure about this. And then before you know it, there was a question from the governor asking for an AG's opinion. And then here we are. But this is not an inside the Capitol, like scheming going on. It's all done in plain view. And I, for one, I've known Governor Armstrong a long time and have high regard for him. He's smart. He works hard at things. And I'll add to that, I really appreciate what I'll call the humility of how he handled this. I'm talking about, look, we'll see, the chips are going to fall where they fall, and we'll see what the AG, what the opinion is across the hallway. I think that bodes well. We've had a really good.
It also opened the door to calling a special session. Even he said, I think his first statement publicly about it was, if we need to, we'll call a special session, but let's see what happens. And so
about the 35 million though, right? Not about the 100. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So the reality is Kelly owned it. I mean, Kelly owned the mistake.
Absolutely.
And I know we're up against it, Drew. I want to ask you about your thoughts on the legislative session and how your office did. I want to ask you about the Holmberg investigation.
Yeah, we have 3 minutes left.
I know. That's what I'm saying. So, Drew, I want you to come back on because I have a bunch of other stuff I want to talk to you about.
No, I'd love to.
We have 3 minutes.
I'd love to. I think it was a lot of people. One of the things you hear a lot is people, there was a strange legislative session. They had some oddities about it. There are some things, I feel like this office, we felt really good about the session from the standpoint of really appreciate the legislative support of our budget, which we're super transparent about around here. And we're really prideful of that. We open things up. Legislators can talk to anybody in this office they want to discuss that stuff with. They don't have to just be going through us. We ended up with really solid support from the legislature for our budget. We appreciated that. We had, the high profile matter that didn't go our way was truth in sentencing. That's well documented out there. And that happens. I'm a combative person, and I believe very strongly in that. But I also recognize that the day comes where something is resolved now. For now, it's not, the issue's not done for good, but it's resolved for now. And then you move on to the next things. There were some implications that the governor and I were battling about that. That was absolutely not true. I think there were some people maybe on both sides of it, but not he and I never did. And which wouldn't be bad if we did. But I just want to point that out. So that was one high profile matter that didn't go our way, and a bunch of stuff that we played defense effectively on that I think were bad policy ideas coming into this building. We worked assiduously to put daylight on those, and in a number of them, the right result from, I think, the perspective of the people in North Dakota was, you don't get thank you notes for things that don't happen, but we feel there are a lot of really seasoned, experienced people up and down these hallways in the Attorney General's office, and they really put a shoulder into this because this process matters a lot. So it was, I think in that regard, it was a positive session. We felt good about it afterward, and look forward to going forward into the new biennium.
Drew, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Drew.
Yep. Thanks, fellas.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
You know, we're all watching what's happening in California right now, and there's a lot of lenses to look at that through. Obviously, the debate over immigration is a tough one. I support deporting people who are in this country illegally, particularly people who have committed other crimes in addition to illegal immigration. I don't think that they should be here. But there's a fundamental question that is separate from the immigration debate, and that's about the use, how America's military should be used, specifically how it should be used domestically, and what the guardrails between that and between military and politics should be. Now, this weekend, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, is planning a military parade. Just happens to be on his birthday. We're doing this at a time where we're scrimping. We're supposedly trying to address the budget and deficit situation, but this parade is going to cost us millions, some 6,600 soldiers, 200 tanks, warplanes, helicopters. It's going to be not unlike the military parades we saw once upon a time through Red Square in Russia. And maybe people think that that's an unfair comparison, but I think that the president, it'd be one thing if we were honoring our military. I think that this is about the president honoring himself, frankly. The other thing is the deployment of the military in California, which itself has two separate issues. One is the California National Guard. The other are United States Marines who have been deployed to California. This in the context of the president talking about arresting the governor of California and arresting the mayor of Los Angeles. And also, let's not forget that the president just gave a speech on June 10th at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, which was frankly a political rally. And I'm reading actually an Army Times news story, which said that troops who attended the address were reportedly screened for their appearance and political views. And so that concerns me, that we're politicizing our military, which I think is absolutely wrong and un-American. And also we are using the military domestically against U.S. citizens in ways that I think are inappropriate. And in the context of all of that, this letter to the editor published in the Fargo Forum from Andrew Loftesnes, the headline was, "I served in the Marine unit deployed in Los Angeles. Here's what I think of President Trump's orders." Andrew writes, "The choice to serve my country in the U.S. Marine Corps remains the proudest of my life. During my enlistment, I served as a rifleman in an infantry company with 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, 1st Marine Division, the exact same unit that President Trump has deployed in Los Angeles against the American people. This decision from the president is not only a direct threat to democracy and, in my opinion, a significant steps towards autocracy, but also a direct betrayal of the young men and women who serve in the Marine Corps and other branches of the U.S. military." Andrew, when I saw your letter, I immediately wanted to have you on the podcast to talk about this. I am not a military veteran, neither is Chad. So first of all, thank you for your service. And second of all, also tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this.
For sure. First, thank you guys both for reaching out and having me on. I really appreciate it. Long story short, and we can go into as much detail as you want, but my family is from North Dakota. That's where my roots are at. My dad joined the Marine Corps before I was born. I spent 20 years in the Marine Corps serving his country, so I lived the typical military family life, moving across the country and the world. And then, during that time, growing up, it was always my dream as well to serve in the Marine Corps. I followed through with that. I served for 4 years, was honorably discharged, did the whole GI Bill thing and moved on with my life, which is to say that I take certain things, especially the apolitical nature of our military, very, very seriously. And I would be happy to talk about that. And as you mentioned, Rob, there's two separate issues here. There's the way that the California National Guard is being used. And then more specifically, what I wrote about was the way that the Marine Corps is being used and the fact that it's being used at all in this context. And then, so when I saw that active duty Marines might be deployed into an American city, obviously that caught my eye, right, to put it lightly. And then when I saw that it was 2-7, which is the last unit I was in before I finished my service, to be honest, I took that very personally, and I started writing the letter that I wanted to get an opinion out there and see if I could find some fellow Americans who think the same way about it.
Andrew, I want to just reiterate what Rob said. Thank you for your service, and I recognize your last name and know some people who share your last name in the in Bismarck, and I have great respect for them. I don't know if you're related to them, but I have great respect for them.
I can know my parents, so I appreciate that.
I want to read something from your letter that sort of hit me in the gut when I read it.
Yes, sir.
Practically speaking, an infantry unit is not trained for law enforcement, crowd control, nor should it be. The mission of the Marine Corps Rifle Squad, as every Marine in Los Angeles knows it to be, is, quote, locate, close with, and destroy the enemy by fire and maneuver, or repel the enemy's assault by fire in close combat, unquote. What message are we sending to United States citizens in Los Angeles by sending folks that are trained to do exactly that? And what position are we putting these Marines in for a really, really bad situation? Because they're not trained, like you said, to do law enforcement. They're trained to do something very, very different, and that is to destroy the enemy. I don't think citizens in California are the enemy. So can you just talk about, like, is this going to create an even more explosive situation in Los Angeles? And what are these Marines feeling being put in these positions?
Yeah, all really good and important questions. For the first one, I think this is one of those situations where the answer is kind of in the question, right? When, in my opinion, when the administration says send in the Marines, right? That phrase, we know, because you feel it when you hear someone say that, right? We know it. America's enemies know it, which is the point, right? But I don't think that's something that American citizens should hear with them in the subject line, right? So that's one thing. I do believe that it's a direct and intentional escalation from the administration. And then when it comes to, so the line from the letter, from my letter that you just wrote, is the mission of the Marine Corps Rifle Squad, right? Every Marine starts learning this basically night one of boot camp. And that mission is what the Marine Corps does, right? That is what it uses all of its time and energy, and its most important resource, its people, right? The young Americans you join is to train for that mission. Now, the Marine Corps is a very dynamic organization, right? And they can and will do whatever the President of the United States or the Secretary of Defense calls on them to do. But, like, make no mistake, that is the bread and butter of what this organization does, especially the infantry. And I'll show my bias, but I would say especially 2-7 and the guys out in 29 Palms, which has a special reputation in the Marine Corps. So while it is true that Marines they do training on like non-lethal tactics, right? Tear gas and that sort of thing. It needs to be understood that the amount of time spent on that training absolutely pales in comparison to their training for combat, right? Which is what I think the American people should hope it is that way, right?
Right.
I would hope that the American people would want the Marine Corps, would want all of our branches of the service to be balanced in that way, right? And then the other thing that I think is important to distinguish there is that even with, assume that they have like proper non-lethal training, right? Let's just assume that to make a point. It is a fact that they are not law enforcement officials. The U.S. Marine Corps is not a law enforcement organization, right? Law enforcement officers are trained in recognizing and to avoid violating the constitutional rights of American citizens if they have to apprehend them, right? The U.S. Marine Corps does not do that. It should not do that. That shouldn't even be something that these young guys are having to worry about. And then if I missed anything, let me know. But I think to get to your final question, Chad, was what's going through the minds of these young men and women that got sent into an American city. Well, I can say with certainty that they never thought when they joined the Marine Corps this would be what they were getting activated for, right? I'm very confident saying that. The only other thing I'll say is that, as I said in my letter, despite and perhaps ironically this crisis, I have extreme faith right now in these guys that are going in there, right? Again, coming from a place of pride and bias, but the Marine Corps is the most disciplined fighting force in the world, let alone the United States, right? And in my opinion, we also have the best leadership. And Americans can definitely feel good about that. But at the end of the day, again, you're taking these warriors, right? And you're putting them in American streets. Typically they're very young, and you're placing them in a dynamic situation where, let's just be honest, things have potential to go very wrong.
It's really, I feel like the provocation is the point.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we're talking about it being provocative. I think that if we gave some truth serum to the president and some of his cabinet members, they would say, yeah, we're intending to do that. And frankly, I think some of the protesters are trying to provoke the violent ones. I mean, they want to instigate this conflict. They want ugly images, both. And that terrifies me, that both sides want ugliness out of this because they can each use it to serve their political ends. And that really, and when I say both sides, I mean some of the extreme elements of the protesters. It makes me think of the Dakota Access protests, and I wrote about this, the Dakota Access protests here in North Dakota, where our law enforcement was overrun. There were very loud calls on then Governor Jack Dalrymple to call in the North Dakota National Guard to respond. He resisted those calls for a long time. And when he finally did acquiesce to them, he assigned the National Guard to a support role where mostly they were bringing water out. They were doing traffic control. They weren't on the front lines dealing with the protesters. Those were civilian law enforcement officers. I thought in another situation where, again, I think a lot of people wanted to provoke and they wanted that conflagration to keep going and to keep burning. And the governor of North Dakota exercised discretion. He said, no, we're going to keep this a law enforcement matter. We're going to try to de-escalate this. That's the sort of leadership we want right now. And unfortunately, I don't think that's the leadership we're getting from Washington.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you completely. I think you put it very well. The escalation 100% is the point. Both, again, with like this unit that they're sending in the way that they're doing it, even the way that they're using the National Guard, right? Like, another thing that I don't think people are talking about enough is, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the situation in LA right now warrants the National Guard, right? Let's just say for a fact that is the case. It is still a fact that and if you guys think I'm wrong, let me know. But in my opinion, anyone who calls themselves a conservative politically, I think, should be horrified by this federal overreach of the city of Los Angeles said, we got it. The Los Angeles Police Department said, we got it. And the state, these are all elected officials by Americans, said, we got it. And then the president, and I say the president, not specifically Trump, because again, I think it's the principle here, like, reached way down and intervened. And I would like to ask people who think that the president is doing the right thing right now, how they can justify that. Because in my opinion, that flies in the face of like every traditional like conservative value. And
as the conservative on the call, Andrew, I don't know your politics, but as the conservative on the call, I can tell you in years past, we talked a lot about that, about the Posse Comitatus Act and being, wanting a bright line between when the United States, the awesome power of the United States military is used domestically. If you read into a lot of the conspiracy theories about FEMA and stuff like that, a lot of that is tied up in concerns about deploying the military. And I remember back in 2009 when I was organizing Tea Party rallies, how we would have felt if somebody had called the National Guard out. Now, none of the rallies that I got violent or anything like that. They were all lawful. And in fact, most of them were across the country. But can you imagine if like Barack Obama sent in the Marines?
No, I can see even when you say
protests he didn't like. I mean, that would be wrong. And this is wrong.
Yes, it is. It is. No, there's no question. And again, like I think it's really uh I have no problem saying that I'm not a supporter of President Trump. I have never voted for him. But again, it's the principle of it. I truly I believe this very strongly. Like one of the things that makes our country the envy of the world, one of the many reasons is the apolitical nature of our military, right? Because that more than anything else guarantees our domestic stability uh, and and like peace, right, within our own borders. Which again, like might sound crazy, but compared to many other places in the world, and it's simply a fact. And all of our prosperity stems from the fact that we are essentially domestically a stable country. And I think that when we begin to chip away at the apolitical nature of the military, we are really going down a bad road. I mean, think about it. The military is probably the only public institution remaining in this country that basically everyone has faith in, right? And I think if we begin to lose that, I mean, do we really want to go down that road and see where it leads? Many countries have, right? I think we need to protect the apolitical nature of our military, like very, very passionately.
So, Andrew, I want to dive a little bit deeper into that because I think it's all you're exactly right. But I guarantee there's a bunch of people who read your letter to the editor and said, in this political world, right, everything that we do and say, and even your letter was very straightforward that you're standing up for the Marines and what's right and making sure they stay apolitical. There's a bunch of North Dakotans that read that letter to the editor and said, look at this partisan. Look at this guy who's just attacking the president. He wouldn't be saying this if it was somebody else. Mm-hmm. What would you say to those people in terms of, again, going back to the why you decided to write this letter to the editor and why speak out now? I mean, this is again, thank you for doing that because you are putting yourself out there. But what was going through your head at this time when you're, the military, we need it to stay apolitical, but everything we do is seen through a political lens?
You're 100% correct. And I read many messages in the comment section to that effect. To be honest,
don't read the comment section, Andrew. No. What are you doing, man?
I'm a first.
I read them too. I can't help it.
First timer, moth to the flame. But it was very revealing. One, a lot of people were under the impression that I'm in the military right now. I'm not. Right. I clearly say that I was a veteran. I'm a civilian. I'm a private citizen. And so I am not in the military, and I do not work for the U.S. government whatsoever. Again, bring it back to the principle, right? Like, I believe this. We have a responsibility as American citizens to peacefully practice our First Amendment rights. And guess what? If someone vehemently disagrees with me, and I know for a fact many people in North Dakota do because I did make the mistake of scrolling down.
You read the comments.
Yeah. I did. You did read the comments. I'll try not to tonight because it's Friday and I want to enjoy myself. But I mean this very seriously. If you are listening and you vehemently disagree with every single thing I have said, sit down, write a letter, publish it, and let the public debate it, right? Put your ideas out there, really. And I mean, that's not a threat to me. That's not a threat to anyone. That's kind of what the point of this whole thing, right? Of this whole country is that we can do that without fear. And I think it's very important for people to, at a certain point, like you need, maybe the irony here is that I actually come from, professionally speaking, like an apolitical background, right? I grew up in a military family my whole life. Like I went to high school in a military base in Okinawa, Japan, right? Extremely apolitical environment, I promise you. I served in the military myself for a time. I've been a government civilian in a previous job in the past, right? So I've been like in professional roles that require me to be apolitical my entire life. Now I'm a complete civilian. I'm just a normal guy. And I felt like I saw something that was wrong. And, at a certain point, you have to take a stand for something. And I felt like this was the best way to at least start doing that. And again, I hope other people feel the same way. And if people feel the same way, but on the other side of this issue, say so. And I mean say so. Like put your ideas out there. It's not there's many unproductive ways to do that, but there's many like positive ways to do that as well. I welcome those ideas. Let's hear them. Right.
One of the tough things right now is that people only see these issues through the politics of the moment. Where if it was Barack Obama deploying a marine company to respond to a Tea Party protest, the reactions from the right would be very different than Donald Trump deploying them against. And I don't want to defend necessarily the protesters. I mean, they're destroying cars, they're throwing bricks. Some of what's going on there is unacceptable. It's also not out of control. It's been exaggerated. It's even compared to some riots we've seen after sports championships. This is relatively small. I think that the president is trying to make it bigger because it redounds to his benefit politically. But I'm wondering a little bit about when I watched this rally at Fort Bragg, and I'm thinking about the situation that the soldiers themselves have been put in, because my father was won a Silver Star in Vietnam, so from a family perspective, we know a little bit about serving your country at a time where maybe the conflict in question is a little dubious, or, the Iraq war. I think in hindsight, maybe there's some people who served that one. And I mean, Rudyard Kipling wrote ours not to reason why, ours but to do and die. That's kind of the military ethos. I'm really worried that this idea that the president, the administration was screening soldiers of whether or not they're going to appear at this rally because of their politics. Now think about that internally. If you're one of the people that got screened out because when you're in high school, you made a Facebook post. I don't know how they're doing the screening, but who knows?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I mean, if you're in the military, what do you think that does to your career? That you got screened out by the commander in chief, that you weren't allowed to attend his political rally. I mean, I feel like some of the political things we're doing are putting the men and the women military in a terrible, terrible position. Now, again, I've never served in the military, but I mean, if you were in the ranks at Fort Bragg that day, or you were in this Marine group that's been deployed to Los Angeles, what would you be thinking?
Yeah, that's, I've been thinking about that sort of thing recently. Obviously, today I was watching the video of the president's speech at Fort Bragg, right? And I think it's extremely important that, we don't just dismiss these things that might seem small in comparison to other things we can imagine, right? Because this is literally, I think, how it starts. I think that Tom Nichols wrote a piece in The Atlantic recently talking about this, like someone in real leadership, right, needs to take a principled stand, right? Resign something, but say this is wrong, really, right? Because the thing, the president was, in this speech, he was talking about how it's the biggest crowd anyone could have. One, those guys didn't have a choice, right? I thought that was very strange to see. And then he talks about how Biden, he starts talking trash against Biden. And, the President Trump doing that, in front of Air Force One is one thing. Doing that in front of active duty soldiers and expecting, an applause is quite another. Right. And I think that I would say to Americans and to North Dakotans who think that's fine, right, we need to accept the fact that right now precedent is being set for future generations, right? It is a fact that someone that you all of us, that you do not like will be president of the United States someday, right? Precedent matters. It matters in law. It matters in executive action. It matters with what leaders think that they can get away with. And then, Rob, just go back real quick. I think because I wanted to talk about what you mentioned with property damage and stuff in LA. Another set of responses I saw to the letter was people assuming that anyone who thinks sending in the Marines is the wrong idea is totally okay for just absolute bedlam, right? And it's not illogical whatsoever to say, look, we need to do something, but this is the wrong way to do it, right? This is not the way. I don't think there's any contradiction.
I mean that sort of thinking, it's well, if you're not in favor of napalming them, then must be in favor of the riots. Like that, we're allowed to have a debate about the degree of the response and the nature of the response and what's appropriate.
100%. 100%.
Hey, Andrew, it may come as a surprise to some of the listeners, but I actually do some research before these podcasts, and I think you wrote a book. Is that true?
Yes.
As Rob mentioned, both of our fathers, or his father and my father, are both Vietnam veterans. So I would love to hear a little bit about the book that you wrote, because I think it might be of interest to both of us.
I appreciate you bring that up. I didn't know that you guys come from the families of Vietnam veterans, and I respect that a great deal. I'll tell you why. So the book is called Looking for Billy, The Story of an American Life. And my mom had a cousin who was killed at the age of 19 in Vietnam, right? A couple of weeks before he was supposed to come home. And this was in 1969. And this was something that we always knew about in the family, right? But we never really knew too much of the details. And then one day over a year ago, my grandparents passed away recently. They're buried in Bismarck Veterans Cemetery. But my mom was cleaning out their things and going through my grandma's dresser drawer. She found, you never know where you're going to find something, right? Like the original casualty notification letter from the Marine Corps for Billy, right? For her cousin. And then she sent that to the family. She's like, oh, look what I found. And I was reading it for the first time. And so I was in 2-7, right? Billy was in 1-7. So we were in the same regiment. And I was like, wow, there has to be a story here. And that's what I went looking to find. The goal of the book was to discover the story of, like, presidents and generals, especially the ones that make bad decisions, right? If you want to talk about Vietnam, they have enough history books about them. But I wanted to tell the story of, like, a normal guy, right? Who just, like, he was born when he was born, where he was born, and he played his part in the events of his time, and it cost him his life. Like, if you take, one non-famous name off the wall in Washington, D.C., what's his story, right? And that was the goal of the book. I'll be honest, it was a passion project. I put my heart and soul into it, and then I hope that I told his story well. But his name was Lance Corporal William Matthias Morse, and he was.
That one's going on my reading list for sure. And I got to tell you, when my father listens to this, and when you talk about the Marines being the finest fighting unit, he was an Army guy. And he always told me that the only reason we have the Marines is so that the Navy guys had someone to dance with on deck.
There's a number of directions we could take that one, but I'm not sure if it's.
I'll let you two take it up. I'm going to stay
out. No, he can slow whatever he wants. Trust me.
No, and it's all he's joking. He had wonderful things to say about the Marines as well. So, Andrew, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew.
I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you very much.
Hey, Plain Talk listeners, have something to say? Call or text Plain Talk with your questions, comments, or headlines you want us to cover.
Just dial 701-587-3141. Leave us your message or shoot us a text with your name and location, and you could be featured on an upcoming show.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and I am in Jamestown.
Hey, Rob and Chad. My name's Tony. I live in Grand Forks.
That's 701-587-3141.
Call us, text us, vent, praise.
We want you in the conversation. Thanks for being part of the show.
Now let's get back to today's episode.
Welcome back. We had a super nerdy, very North Dakota specific interview to start the show, and then an interview with a North Dakota, or I guess North Dakota native.
Adjacent?
Adjacent North Dakota expat living outside of the state now, but felt like he needed to write his local newspaper to express something of what's going on in California. And again, I mean, it's so difficult because it's really hard to have a conversation with somebody about this, to say that I don't support the people who are being violent over these. I support the right to the people who are protesting legally to have their say, even though I don't even necessarily, and I'm not even necessarily against the deportations, although I think the way the Trump administration is doing it, I mean, they're doing it for like maximum provocation. And I don't agree with that. I don't think in the long run, I think that might be good for Trump politically, but I think as a practical matter of enforcing immigration policy in the long term. I think that's a mistake. And I'm very concerned about this politicization of the military, deploying them domestically against Americans, the loose talk about arresting the governor of California. And then we have a U.S. senator who gets frog marched out of a press conference being held by the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, and gets arrested. And people say, well, he interrupted her or whatever. And he did. He did interrupt her. And maybe that was a mistake on his part, but did that justify frog marching him and arresting him and handcuffing him and tackling him to the ground? And by the way, we also can't ignore the context that the Trump administration is talking about arresting their political rivals. So when are we going to cool some of this stuff down?
Yeah. So I really, really enjoyed the interview with Andrew a lot because I think it was such a unique perspective. But when he did say, he had the people in the comment section saying, well, if you're against the Marines going in, therefore you're for everything that's happening. Listen, I support protests. I support the right of people to peacefully protest. I don't like violence on either the left or the right as part of these protests. But I also don't think that sending in the Marines is the right approach. And the fact that we can't have a conversation, Rob, it's no different than when I started doing this podcast with you. And I had people on the left said, what are you doing a podcast with Rob? And essentially insinuating that means that I agree with you on everything. That's not the way the world works. I mean, we can have conversations, we can have disagreements, and we also don't, if you're against something, doesn't mean you're absolutely for the exact opposite. So, by the way, thanks for reaching out to Andrew, because that was such a good, thoughtful interview from a perspective of somebody who is not part of these debates enough. He's not that far removed from being one of those young soldiers on the streets of Los Angeles trying to figure out, what the hell am I doing here? I did not sign up for this.
Yeah. And it is really frustrating. And we're not, again, everything is about the politics of the moment. And that's, we seem to, in the past, ideology has been sort of a dirty word, right? You can call people an ideologue and they're too hidebound. But in some ways, I kind of wish we had some principles guiding people right now. I wish that conservatives had maintained their principles about the domestic use of military. I wish, but we're just not doing it. It's because because it works, because Trump's doing it in the moment. And because maybe it's good for him politically right now, it's okay. And we're not thinking about, well, what new precedents are we setting whereby future presidents, whatever their party, can use the military for their political benefit, press gang troops into political rallies while you excoriate the former commander in chief. We have proud traditions about this. Even the deployment of the National Guard, I suspect that that's probably legal. Now there was a federal judge that enjoined it and said that the guard had to be turned back over to the control of the governor of California. But now that's been stayed by a appeals court. So the legal wrangling is ongoing about that. I'm open to the idea that that was legal. The problem is just because it's legal doesn't mean it was the right move to overstep, because it has been done before, right? During the civil rights movement, and the president, the White House used the National Guard to protect civil rights protesters. And that was probably an appropriate use given the circumstance, but we are not anywhere near
that
sort of conflagration we saw back then. And so this, again, it's all just provocation.
And I will say, one of the things we talked about there is this sort of goes against conservative values, the idea of the military being used against the opinion of the states and the cities. That's an American value. That's not just a conservative value. I mean, I'm not a conservative.
I'm only saying that in the context that this is something that these self-proclaimed conservatives used to believe.
Absolutely. And it's the conservatives who are saying, I'm comfortable with this. But this should make every American, regardless of their ideology, really, really uncomfortable if we are using, again, the most powerful military in the world, the best trained, the one institution, as Andrew pointed out, that we can all still get behind, right? We've lost those things against American citizens, or even potentially people who are here illegally. I don't have a problem with arresting people and getting. We need to be careful that we're not creating a war zone on the streets by bringing in the military, who's not trained to do this stuff. We have people who are trained to do this stuff. It's not them.
Yeah. I mean, there's the law enforcement in Los Angeles. And by the way, as we saw during the Dakota Access Pipeline protest, law enforcement can call for assistance from other jurisdictions. Certainly that could happen within California. They could get help from other states if they need. I don't think they're anywhere near that point. And yeah, some of those protests got ugly. I mean, I look at the video and I wince. And frankly, if you're on the left side of this debate, you ought to be unhappy every time somebody puts a brick through a window.
Amen.
That is not helping your cause at all.
Not helping your cause. And I think one of my frustrations, though, is Jimmy Kimmel just did like a 10-minute sort of bit the other day of walking around the city and videotaping people vacationing and whatever. And so, like, sort of the national news narrative is just focused on these hot spots around the city. Well, it's not that widespread, but the images of that brick going through the window is so compelling and so bad for people on the left who are trying to protest. And again, I saw a video of somebody, stopping people trying to go to work. And it's like, hey man, I understand you're trying to protect immigrant families here, but you're not doing us any good by stopping a bunch of people who are trying to go to work to feed their kids. That doesn't help the narrative of what you're trying to do. So again, I think I'm all for protests. I'm all for doing it peacefully, but sometimes it's not done in a way. It's protesting for the sake of protesting, and to be, like you mentioned, like sort of being provocative rather than thinking about the long-term goal.
Do you agree with it? There's like a feedback loop between sort of the mega Trump and the violent, more extreme left-wing protesters, where I think, frankly, I think they both want blood in the streets. I don't say that lightly, but I think they both, if in different ways, it serves their ends. Where I think the extreme left-wing protesters, they want videos of them being beaten or batoned or tear gas or whatever. And I think on the other side, they want images of these left-wing protesters just being brutalized. There's appetite for that on both sides, and they're giving it to it. And the people on the streets are cannon fodder.
And I worry about those extreme people who just want, to create chaos. It takes away from the real protesters who have real concerns. The folks that are doing protests this weekend around the state, concerns about Medicaid cuts and some of those things, they're people with real concerns, and they're going to stand on a street corner and they're going to wave their signs and they're going to let people know how they feel, and hopefully they're elected officials. That's what America's about. But if they start blowing, starting a car on fire that goes by, that's a different story. And it doesn't do your side, meaning the side of the protesters, any good at all.
When our previous show, we talked about Earl Pomeroy and the Tea Party protests, some of which I had a hand in organizing. And I could tell you from the protester, because that was the tactic from Democrats at the time, is they would zero in on somebody holding an awful sign.
Of course.
Terrible, and try to paint the whole movement that way. Or if somebody did something at a rally somewhere else, I don't think it ever happened in North Dakota, but if somebody got violent or got into a fist fight or something at another protest, they'd try to paint the whole movement. I could tell you how adamant we were that we are going to be peaceful, we are going to be respectful, and also we're going to clean up after ourselves. So we're going to leave the park or wherever it was we were organizing at. We're going to leave it cleaner than we left it. Because we knew how susceptible we were to somebody picking out one little thing and say, look, this guy's got a sign for Jews for Jesus or something, and everybody's just like that crazy guy. And I say that was really somebody who showed up at one of our rallies holding that sign up, and it's like, I can't control who shows up here and waves these signs sometimes.
Well, and who's the openly racist guy in Fargo that was like a delegate at the Republican convention, and
Pete Taft.
Yeah, Pete Taft. You know how often Democrats looked at Pete Taft and said, "Look, he represents the Republicans, right?" And the same thing happens on the right. You can't control a couple crazy people with crazy signs or crazy actions or whatever. And again, I think your point of cleaning up after yourself, being respectful to other people, that's when you make the movement move the furthest, especially in an environment like North Dakota, where people don't want violent, like it makes them confrontation makes North Dakotans uncomfortable, right? And so you do have to be careful that you're not pushing people away from your side with some of your actions.
You know how I know that confrontation makes North Dakotans uncomfortable? Is how often I run into people in real life who write awful things about me on Facebook.
Yeah.
And they're a very different person in person than they are on social media. And I always,
You know how I know people, North Dakotans hate conflict is sometimes I will say really negative things about elected officials on this podcast, and then I'll see them at the Capitol, and I'll do everything I can to not talk to them.
oh, yeah, well, that's just how it goes. I always just tell them, it's not personal.
Yeah. Well, and that's just it. I mean, Drew actually referenced, people thinking he and Kelly were fighting throughout the whole session. Two of those people were people he was talking to.
I mean,
you know why? Because I think they were fighting during the session.
Well, and fighting is a word. I mean, they were obviously at loggerheads over a question.
They weren't coming to blows in the Great Hall.
But also they were routinely showing up at industrial commission meetings and working just fine together. They're professionals. They know when to fight and when not to fight. And that's how it goes. I mean, that's how it's supposed to work. And again, I watch what's happening in California, and the whole thing, we can do so much better than this. But the thing is, the public has to want better. And the thing that drives me nuts is, I mean, Fox News and MSNBC are looking at the worst aspects of this from their respective angles, and all the influencers and social media people and all that are doing the same because there's an audience for it.
Well, and I also, we're in this time where we always, say always back the blue, always, support our veterans. And then you have somebody like Andrew who says something that maybe a big chunk of people.
Who is a veteran?
What's that?
Who is a veteran, by the way.
And, he'll say something that people don't like, and then all of a sudden, well, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, right? I mean, it's okay for a group of people. And I liked when he said, if you disagree with my opinion, write back. Don't tell me I'm dumb. Don't tell me I'm a socialist or whatever. Write back. Let's have a conversation. We can do that.
Yeah. I will tell you that probably the worst thing I've heard, and there's been so many bad things. I don't know why this just stuck out for me, but when Kristi Noem was talking about they're going to liberate Los Angeles from socialist leadership, and I'm thinking, you mean the people of Los Angeles
elected,
that the people of California elected? Those are elected leaders. I get it. I don't. Gavin Newsom doesn't govern the way I.
You wouldn't vote for Gavin Newsom. I wouldn't vote for Kristi Noem.
Right. I wouldn't vote for Kristi Noem either, to be honest with you. But I'm
having a tough time figuring out who you're going to vote for at some point, Rob.
I need somebody. I did vote. I voted for Kamala Harris. We all saw how that worked out.
Yeah. Maybe you're the reason why she lost. Jane. Like, if we've come to a place where Rob Port is voting for Kamala Harris, like, it's time to wrap it up. The world.
I think Democrats have to figure out how we got to this point, and why they're losing this fight, because they are. I mean, they're losing this argument over and over again. I mean, Donald Trump wants this conflict, and that's what scares me about Gavin Newsom's leadership. Is I feel in some ways he's giving Trump exactly the conflict that he wants, and it just. I mean, Democrats have got to figure out a different way, because I think part of the reason we got here is years. Anybody saying let's secure the border, you're treated like a racist, and that was wrong. That was wrong. Americans want a secure border, and they don't want people. And we're even finding out a significant portion of the Hispanic community that is here legally they want border enforcement.
See, but I think one of the most interesting things that Earl Pomeroy said on Wednesdays, talking about the president being the distractor in chief, and the fact that we're not talking about Medicaid cuts anymore. We're not talking about Elon and Trump fighting anymore, right? We're now talking about this. We're now this weekend, what are we going to be talking about? The military parade going on. I mean, he does these things so we lose focus on other things. That's the goal, right?
The thing is, if you listen to Steve Bannon and something, it's a tactic. They do this on purpose.
Yep, absolutely.
There's so many things to shake your head about that it gets lost. It gets lost.
And again, when we talk to Andrew, the speech at Fort Bragg, right? That doesn't seem like a big deal now because it's Trump. This is what Trump does. He does crazy. Like, the bar has changed. If Barack Obama would have given that speech at Fort Bragg, it would have been 24/7 on cable news. But now it's like, here's Trump being Trump again.
Yeah. Well, it would have been 24/7, Fox News hitting Obama, MSNBC defending him. And there's nobody that just steps apart and just says, this is just objectively wrong, and it doesn't matter who did it.
Yep.
No, there's not enough people doing that.
You know who does do it? Rob Port and Chad Oban on Plain Talk.
That's right. We're doing our best for the middle. By the way, I have a book recommendation I read while I was on vacation. It was I referenced it in a column, but it was called The Ghosts of Iron Mountain. And it was about this this satirical government report it was authored. It was completely made up, but it was presented to the public as true back in the 60s. And it was written by, or maybe it was the early 70s, I'm forgetting now, but it was written by left-wing critics of the Vietnam War. Only the shelf life of this thing has gone on to inform. I mean, Alex Jones is still talking about it as though it were real today. But along the way of sort of exploring, the life cycle of this piece of satire, talks a lot about the extreme left and the extreme right and horseshoe and overlap and how people move from the left to the right. And it was so relevant as we're watching figures like RFK Jr. move from the far left to the far right. Fetterman, U.S. Senator John Fetterman, who's suddenly, hanging out.
Yeah, and is that related to mental health issues? Is that related to physical health issues? I mean, there's so much going on with that guy that
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not going to diagnose him.
Right, but it's very confusing.
But it was just such an interesting. The Ghosts of Iron Mountain, it's called. Fantastic book. I actually bought a copy. I did not plan this. I'm not getting anything, but by Phil.
Yeah, I was going to ask what the author's paying you for this.
But I actually bought a copy of the original report too.
Jeez.
But fantastic book, very illuminating for this time we're living in. And but we're going to put a pin in it there. Thank you so much for listening.
Hey, Rob, one last thing. I did get some feedback from Wednesday's show that it was agreed upon that we were pretty rusty in that first 30 minutes on Wednesday. We're back, baby. We're back today.
Coming up on, we actually already have Wednesday's show, just how back we are. We already have Wednesday's show booked. Our treasurer, Thomas Beadle, is going to be on. We're going to talk a little bit about those baby bonds, which I think are a very interesting idea.
You've got some interesting feedback on that you sent me the other day. I can't wait to talk about that on Wednesday.
Yeah. I think it confuses like right-wingers a lot right now, because on one hand, it's like, you're just going to spend all this government money. But on the other hand, it's like, wait a minute, Trump endorsed this idea at the federal levels. They're just confused by it.
Yep.
And then also like really upset, like, oh, Port, you're agreeing with Trump on something. And it's like, yeah, that's what I do. If he's occasionally right about something, I wish he was right about more things. I might even consider voting for him if he was. Anyway, we're also going to have on some folks from the North Dakota, the state investment board, Jody Smith, as well as a member of her staff, on to talk a little bit about North Dakota's legacy fund investments, right? Where we're trying to invest those dollars in North Dakota, an update on that progress. So that's going to be a good show coming up on Wednesday. So be sure to tune in for that. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening.
like it's time to wrap it up, the world.